Do you remember jumping into one of these ball pits as a kid? It sure was fun, and by now I'm pretty sure you heard of the supersized ball pit that opened up in Los Angeles. Looks tempting, doesn't it? Better than any rainbow-colored ball pit you'd ever seen. If you have been to Los Angeles, you know these plastic balls are shade balls. And they're actually not a ball pit, but floating on top of their water reservoirs. Now, before you get thoughts of how to sneak into one for the fun of it, let's know that these balls actually serve a very important purpose, and those water reservoirs store the city's drinkable water. So you better not make the mistake of jumping into one and contaminating the water. Now, before we get into what exactly these shade balls are, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to get notifications of more interesting videos. There are many reservoirs like the one in LA that store drinkable and potable water, and according to federal law, these reservoirs cannot be left open and exposed. In 2006, when there was an outbreak of cryptosporidiosis, the EPA enacted this mandate. Cryptosporidiosis is a stomach disease that is caused by drinking contaminated water, namely that from reservoirs. But the decision to keep the reservoirs covered was not only triggered by this illness, but a whole lot of other harmful side effects of an exposed reservoir. If we give some simple thought to it, the most obvious way these waters can be infected is of course by bird poop. And I'm pretty sure you don't want bird poop bits in your water, no matter how microscopic it is. And then there is debris, dust and dirt that settles on the water over time, and anything that can be blown in by the wind. Many people were even concerned that these open reservoirs could be targeted by terrorists who could fly by and drop toxic chemicals into the water, and result in large populations being infected. These were just a few of the concerns. The biggest concern of keeping these waters exposed was a chemical reaction that occurred in the water when it interacted with sunlight. The reservoirs in LA contain a small amount of chlorine as disinfectant. And when chlorine gets combined with a natural element in the groundwater known as bromide, all while in direct sunlight, it results in a chemical called bromate. So what is the problem with bromate? Well, bromate isn't something you would want to ingest with your water. It can cause abdominal pain, nausea, and could cause serious damage to your kidneys and nervous system if ingested in high doses. Due to the sunlight, another side effect of exposed reservoirs is algae growth, which isn't harmful on its own, but as the algae breaks down and combines with the chlorine in the water, it creates byproducts that have been associated with certain cancers and birth defects. So with all these issues in mind, the only real solution is to cover up these water reservoirs. Shade balls were of course not the first thought in mind. The most logical solution was to build a roof or a tarp, but that would cost a little too much. A little bit like only $300 million little bit. So then came the genius with shade balls. The idea was not that bad. Small 4-inch diameter plastic balls would float on the reservoir and cover the water, preventing harmful pollutants and exposure to direct sunlight, all while preventing evaporation. Shade balls are covered in a black carbon colorant that repels ultraviolet light in order to keep the plastic and other materials from degrading. In this way, the shade balls will keep in good condition for up to 25 years. This alternative not only served the purpose of covering the reservoirs, but were also economical. Each shade ball cost 36 cents only, so that means LA just made a savings of around $250 million. LA County is the first to use these shade balls for this purpose, and they have caught the attention of the public, mainly because these balls are a way to mitigate the effects of drought by saving water from evaporation. The shade balls in LA reservoirs are expected to save about 300 million gallons of water every year. Sounds like a whole lot? Well, what if there was a way to save even more water? According to research done by a student from Florida's Melbourne High School, shade balls could cut down on evaporation even more if they were made to be a 12-sided dodecahedron shape instead of being completely round. When the round shade balls are placed in the water, even when they are packed to their tightest, they still leave about 10% of the water exposed. Replacing these round balls with 12-sided dodecahedron balls would result in less space being exposed. From experiments that he conducted, by placing bins of water, one with open water, one with round shade balls, and one with 12-sided dodecahedron balls, the results came out as follows. The open bins lost 53% of their water. The round shade ball bins lost 36% of its water, and the 12-sided dodecahedron balls bin lost only 1% of their water that evaporated. The experiment also proved to be a success in cutting down algae growth, with the bins of 12-sided dodecahedron balls containing the most clear water. Another unexpected benefit that this team discovered is that these balls also stifled the reproduction of mosquitoes. He claimed to find mosquito larvae in both open bin and the bin with the round shade balls, whereas there were none in the 12-sided dodecahedron ball bins. He explained it is due to the fact that the water surface is almost completely covered in that bin, unlike the other two. This means that changing the shape of the shade balls could not only make them more effective, but also cut down on the spread of mosquito-borne diseases like Zika and malaria. So far, shade balls sound like a genius idea, right? But there have also been some critics to point out where they fall short. These shade balls are expected to save millions of gallons of water from evaporating every year. But while we're overawed by the numbers, we forget to take into consideration the cost of the shade balls. Shade balls may be less expensive than that of building a roof, but they don't tip the scale when compared to the amount of water saved. Firstly, the method of water conservation only begins to work when the balls are kept atop a reservoir for a long amount of time, like that of a few months or even years. At the current rate, 300 million gallons of water is worth about $2 million, compared to shade balls that cost about $34.5 million and need to be replaced about every 20 years or so. So the math really doesn't work through in the case of saving more water, as manufacturing these shade balls ends up costing more than that anyway. Moreover, when it comes to saving water, if we cut down water use by only 5% in our industries, we would save not millions but billions of gallons of water in a much shorter time. Instead of dealing with the root of the problem, we have people promoting shade balls to help save water. But hold on there. Shade balls were not used for the sole purposes of saving water. Rather, it was to stop certain chemicals from forming in the water due to the sunlight, right? Yes, and shade balls do serve that purpose well, but with a downside. The black additive added to the balls are not supposed to be harmful when it leaches, which is awesome. But even with the precaution, most plastics leach endocrine-disrupting chemicals, and over a long period of time, the shade balls are bound to deteriorate. For example, bisphenol A, BPA, which is an endocrine disruptor, breaks down in water in a very short time. These chemicals can interfere with the aquatic life in the reservoirs and with the human hormonal systems due to drinking the water. What chemicals are exactly used in the shade balls are not known. But when these plastic balls are left out in the hot sun for years after years, they are bound to leach. Apart from leaching chemicals in the water, there is also an environmental impact. Most plastics that are found in the ocean start out as part of something bigger, like a bag or a bottle. And over time, they fragment into tiny microplastics. Plastics do not decay like organic substances. Rather, they keep fragmenting into smaller and smaller pieces. Not only is that bad for marine life, but it is bad for us when we consume fish and from drinking that fresh cold glass of small bits of microplastic lemonade. Tasty. So what do you think? Are shade balls going to be the future? Or is it really not that good of an idea? Comment in the section down below.